The evening had started quietly enough. I had just finished dinner and was sinking into the worn comfort of my armchair, half listening to the hum of the city beyond my window. The clock ticked in its steady rhythm, a sound that usually brought calm but tonight felt oddly loud, as if it were counting down to something. I wasn't expecting company. My days had a pattern, predictable and familiar, and I found comfort in that routine. So when the knock came at the door, sharp and deliberate, I hesitated before rising. Guests at this hour weren't common. Opening the door, I found them both standing there. Two women I knew well, two figures who had been part of my life for as long as I could remember. They were dressed simply, but the way the light from the hallway caught their features gave them an almost cinematic glow. Their smiles were warm, but their eyes— there was something unreadable there, something that unsettled me even as it drew me in. "Can we come in?" one of them asked, her tone polite but layered with an undertone I couldn't quite place. I stepped aside, still a little puzzled, and watched them move past me into the room. The air seemed to shift with their presence. The familiar walls of my living space suddenly felt closer, more intimate, as though they were conspiring to hold in whatever was about to happen. They settled onto the couch, sitting close together, their posture relaxed but purposeful. I could tell from the way they exchanged quick glances that they hadn't come for idle conversation. My curiosity stirred, mingling with a flicker of nervous energy that I tried to push down. We began with small talk, of course. It would have been strange not to. I asked about their day, their work, their families, and they answered easily enough. Yet beneath every word was an undercurrent, a sense that these details were nothing more than a curtain before the real show. The longer I sat with them, the clearer it became. Something unspoken hung in the air. Their laughter lingered a beat too long, their eyes held mine a little too steadily, and each time one of them leaned forward to make a point, I found myself hyper-aware of the space between us shrinking. I tried to brush it off as imagination, the product of a restless evening and unexpected company, but when one of them reached out, almost casually, and let her hand rest against mine for a fraction of a second too long, my certainty dissolved. That touch wasn't an accident. I glanced between them, my pulse quickening. They weren't fidgeting or avoiding my gaze. On the contrary, they looked almost expectant, as if waiting for me to finally notice the obvious. "Is everything all right?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Their silence in that moment was louder than any answer. One gave a faint smile, while the other leaned back against the couch cushions, studying me with a calm intensity that made the room feel even warmer. I realized then that this wasn't a casual visit. Whatever had brought them here tonight carried weight, and judging by the way my chest tightened and my palms tingled, I knew that weight was about to shift the ground beneath us. The clock ticked on, relentless, as if marking the moment. My home, usually a place of comfort, had become a stage. And sitting across from me were two women who seemed determined to change the script. I didn't yet know what they wanted. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This was no ordinary evening. The room had grown heavy with silence. Not the kind that comes from a lull in conversation, but the kind that feels deliberate, almost rehearsed. They weren't here by accident. I could see that now. Their eyes told me more than their words had, and though I didn't know what was coming, every nerve in my body was bracing for it. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees. "You didn't just come here to talk about the weather," I said softly, breaking the quiet. The one sitting closest to me smiled faintly, almost as if relieved that I had finally acknowledged the obvious. "You've always been observant," she said, her tone measured, laced with something more than casual admiration. Her companion nodded, glancing at me with an intensity that made my throat tighten. "We came because there's something we've been meaning to ask, something we couldn't keep to ourselves any longer." The words hung in the air like a challenge. My pulse quickened as I searched their faces, trying to read between the lines. Neither of them looked away. If anything, they seemed to draw strength from each other, as though they'd rehearsed this moment, debated it, and finally chosen tonight as the time to speak. I swallowed, my voice barely steady. "What is it?" For a long moment, neither answered. They exchanged a glance, not nervous but conspiratorial. And then the one who had been quietest until now leaned forward, her voice low. "We need your trust," she began. "Before we tell you, we need to know you won't pull away. That you'll at least hear us out?" I blinked, caught between intrigue and unease. Their seriousness was undeniable, and though I had no idea where this was leading, I felt the weight of their request pressing down on me already. "I'll listen," I said finally. She exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath. Her hand brushed against mine briefly, grounding me. "Good, because what we want to ask, it isn't simple, and it isn't something we've ever asked of anyone before." My heart drummed in my chest. The air between us seemed to crackle with unspoken energy, like the pause before a storm breaks. The other woman finally spoke, her tone steady but softer than before. "We've trusted you for a long time, more than you probably realize. And lately, we've both felt something we can't ignore anymore, something we need to explore, together." The words stunned me. I wasn't sure if I'd heard her correctly, or if my mind had twisted them into something I half expected but couldn't quite believe. My breath caught, and I found myself searching their faces again, desperate for clarity. "What are you saying?" I asked, though my voice betrayed how much I already understood. Her gaze didn't waver. "We're saying we want you to be part of something with us, something that goes beyond what anyone else could imagine." The room seemed to tilt slightly, my thoughts spinning as if the ground had shifted beneath me. They weren't speaking in riddles anymore. The meaning was clear, even if they hadn't spelled it out word for word. A dozen objections rushed to my mind. This can't be right. What if this ruins everything? What happens if we regret it? But beneath the panic was another sensation, one I couldn't ignore: curiosity. And an undeniable pull toward the two women sitting across from me, their eyes steady, their expressions vulnerable but determined. I leaned back slowly, trying to ground myself. The clock ticked again, each second loud in the stillness. "This is a lot," I admitted. "We know," one of them said softly. "But we've thought about this for a long time. We couldn't keep it hidden anymore. Not from you." The honesty in her voice disarmed me. This wasn't a passing impulse or a reckless whim. It was deliberate, chosen, confessed after who knows how many nights of hesitation. And they had chosen me as the one to hear it. The weight of that trust settled heavily on my shoulders. Part of me wanted to run, to close the door on this moment and pretend it had never happened. But another part, stronger, undeniable, wanted to stay, to see where this uncharted path might lead. I drew in a slow breath, my eyes moving between them. "You're asking me to cross a line we can't uncross." They both nodded. "Yes," one whispered. "We know." Their honesty left no room for pretense, and though my mind was tangled with doubt and anticipation, my heart had already chosen to keep listening. The strange request had been spoken, and nothing between us would ever be the same again. The room felt impossibly small, as though the walls themselves were leaning closer, pressing us together. Their words still echoed in my head, daring me to accept what had been laid bare. A strange mix of fear and anticipation churned inside me, each heartbeat pulling me further toward the edge of a decision I wasn't sure I was ready to make. For a long while, none of us spoke. The silence stretched thin, taut with unspoken meaning. They sat side by side watching me, their expressions open yet unreadable. It wasn't a trap, I realized. They weren't trying to corner me. This was a choice, mine to make. But knowing that didn't make the weight of it any lighter. "I don't know what to say," I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. One of them leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees, her eyes fixed on mine. "You don't have to say anything yet, just be honest with yourself." Her words struck deeper than I expected. Honesty. That was the problem, wasn't it? Because if I was honest, then I had to admit how often I had noticed them. The way a glance lingered too long. The way their laughter pulled me in. The way their presence filled a room in a way no one else's did. I had buried those feelings, told myself they were nothing more than fleeting thoughts. But now those buried sparks were being fanned into flame. The other woman shifted closer, closing some of the distance between us. Her voice was steady but soft, almost tender. "We don't want to force this. We only want you to see that we're serious. That this isn't a game." I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the nearness of her presence wrapping around me like a tide I wasn't sure I could resist. My instincts screamed to keep control, to step back before everything unraveled. But my body betrayed me, leaning slightly forward, closing the gap without meaning to. She noticed. Her lips curved into a knowing smile, small but certain, and in that moment, something inside me cracked. "I'm afraid," I confessed. "If we cross this line, there's no way back." The first woman reached out, her fingers brushing against mine. The touch was gentle, careful, but it carried a weight that words couldn't match. "We know," she whispered. "And still, we want this. We want you." The final thread of resistance snapped. I let my hand linger in hers, my pulse racing as the air thickened around us. My thoughts blurred, tangled between reason and desire. But my heart had already decided. Slowly, as if testing fate, I allowed myself to lean closer. The space between us shrank, and with it, the tension that had been building for so long threatened to break wide open. I could see the anticipation in their eyes, the way they held their breath as though waiting for me to make the choice. And then I did. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden plunge into chaos. It was a simple gesture, my hand tightening around hers, my body leaning into the gravity that pulled me toward them. That small act was enough. Enough to change everything. Enough to signal that I was no longer fighting the inevitable. The shift was immediate. Relief flickered across their faces, followed by something deeper, more intense. Their shoulders eased, their expressions softened, and for the first time that night, the weight of uncertainty lifted. The first woman let out a quiet laugh, almost disbelieving. "I wasn't sure you'd let yourself get this far." I smiled faintly, though my voice was thick with nerves. "Neither was I." We sat there for a while, the line officially crossed, though the full weight of it hadn't yet settled. My mind buzzed with the reality of what I had just chosen, but strangely, I felt no regret. Only anticipation. The clock ticked on, marking the passage of time, but I knew it no longer mattered. Tonight wasn't about routine or rules. It was about surrendering to a truth we had all carried in silence until now. And as I looked at them, two women whose request had opened a door I never expected, I knew the rest of the night would carry us into uncharted territory. We had crossed the line. There was no turning back. Time seemed to blur after that. The moment we crossed the invisible line between hesitation and acceptance, the air itself seemed to change. The room grew warmer, heavier, filled with a current I couldn't quite name but could feel in every nerve of my body. They didn't rush me. That, more than anything, told me how carefully they had thought this through. They weren't here to corner me or force me into something I wasn't ready for. They wanted me to walk willingly into this uncharted place with them. And astonishingly, I wanted the same. We sat in silence for a few moments longer, the weight of what had been spoken and unspoken hanging thick between us. One of them reached for my hand again, this time without hesitation. Her fingers intertwined with mine, steady and sure. The other woman leaned back, her gaze never leaving me, as if studying every flicker of emotion on my face. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," she said gently. Her words settled deep in my chest. Afraid? Yes, I had been, maybe still was. But beneath the fear was something else, something stronger, a hunger to see where this night might lead. I let out a shaky laugh, trying to mask the storm inside me. "I feel like I've stepped into a story I don't know the ending to." "Maybe that's the point," the other woman said softly. "Some endings aren't meant to be known in advance. Some are meant to be lived." Her voice was calm, almost lyrical, and it pulled me further into the current I was already caught in. As the night unfolded, the three of us moved closer together, not in sudden bursts, but in quiet, deliberate steps. a hand brushing an arm. A laugh that lingered too long, eyes that held mine until I could no longer look away. These small gestures felt monumental, like each one was sealing the choice I had already made. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly look at them, not as the people I had known in passing, but as women standing before me, open and unguarded. Their vulnerability made them even more striking. It wasn't just attraction pulling us together. It was the trust that had been silently building over years, finally brought to the surface. We spoke little, but when we did, the words carried weight. "Do you realize what this means?" I asked at one point, my voice hushed. "Yes," one answered without hesitation. "It means we finally stopped pretending." That honesty hit me harder than anything else. Pretending, yes, that's what we had been doing all this time. Pretending not to notice, not to wonder, not to imagine. Tonight, we stripped away that pretense, and what remained was raw, undeniable connection. The minutes slipped away unnoticed. The clock on the wall marked the passing of time, but for us it no longer mattered. The outside world with its routines and expectations felt a million miles away. Inside this room, there was only the three of us, bound by something fragile yet unbreakable. Every glance, every touch, carried layers of meaning, curiosity, fear, longing, and above all, trust. We were stepping into something that defied definition, something we couldn't explain to anyone else. And yet, in that moment, it felt right. By the time I realized how late it had grown, the thought of ending the night seemed impossible. None of us wanted to move, to break the fragile magic we had spun around ourselves. The night had unfolded slowly, like a secret whispered in the dark, and though it was far from over, I already knew nothing would ever be the same again. The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the light. It streamed in through the blinds in thin golden lines, painting the room with the quiet calm of morning. The world outside had already resumed its rhythm, cars passing, birds calling, but inside, time still felt suspended, delicate and uncertain. For a moment, I didn't move. The memories of the night before came rushing back, vivid and overwhelming. The laughter, the stolen glances, the gentle touches that had grown into something so much more. What had once felt unthinkable had unfolded right here, between the three of us, leaving behind a silence that was no longer empty, but full of meaning. I turned my head slightly and saw them. Both women were still asleep, their breathing steady, their faces softened in the unguarded light of dawn. They looked peaceful, almost ethereal, nothing like the figures of boldness and intensity from the night before. In their rest, they seemed younger somehow, as if shedding the weight of all the decisions and hesitations that had brought us to this point. A pang of emotion struck me. Tenderness, certainly, but also fear, because with the morning came reality. It was one thing to surrender in the dark, to give in to desire when the world was asleep. But what would happen now under the clear light of day? Could we look each other in the eyes and accept what we had done? Or would the weight of expectation and doubt press us back into the roles we had known before? I shifted quietly, careful not to wake them, and sat at the edge of the bed. My hands rested on my knees, my thoughts a tangled mess. The line we had crossed was irreversible. There was no undoing the choices of last night. The only question now was whether we would carry those choices with pride or bury them in silence. Behind me, I heard movement. One of them stirred, then the other, until both were awake, blinking against the sunlight. For a moment, none of us spoke. It was as if we were all waiting for someone else to say the first word, to test the fragile bridge we had built. Finally, one of them smiled, soft, genuine, a smile that reached her eyes. "Good morning." The simplicity of it broke through my tension. I returned the smile, though mine carried traces of nerves. "Morning." The second woman pushed herself up slowly, her hair falling over her shoulders, her gaze steady on me. "You're quiet," she said, not accusing, just observing. "I'm just thinking," I admitted, "about what comes next." They exchanged a glance, the same silent communication they'd shared the night before. But this time, instead of secrecy, it held reassurance. "We knew it wouldn't be simple," the first woman said softly. "We knew there would be questions. But whatever comes next, we don't regret last night." Her words settled something inside me. The fear didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip, leaving space for something else. Possibility. I let out a slow breath. "Neither do I." Silence followed again, but this time it was lighter, calmer. Not the silence of hesitation, but the silence of people who understood each other without needing to fill the space with words. As the morning stretched on, we moved about quietly, brewing coffee, gathering our things, adjusting to the ordinary rhythms of a new day. And yet nothing about it was ordinary. Every glance held more meaning. Every brush of a hand carried a reminder of what we had shared. When they finally prepared to leave, there was no dramatic farewell, no rushed promises. Only a lingering pause at the door, a shared look that said everything words could not. "This isn't the end," one of them whispered before stepping out into the daylight. The door closed softly behind them, and I stood in the quiet, the echoes of the night still alive in my chest. No, this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something risky, complicated, and utterly unforgettable.